Today's show is brought to you by TestCube. Are flaky tests slowing your Kubernetes deployments? TestCube powers continuous, cloud-native testing directly inside your Kubernetes clusters. Seamlessly integrate your existing testing tools, scale effortlessly, and release software faster and safer than ever. Stop chasing bugs in production. Start preventing them with TestCube. Check it out at testcube.io/cloudcast.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Cloudcast. We are coming to you live from the massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Hope everybody is doing well. Another weekend perspective as we wrap up September 2025. We are fully moving into the last quarter of the year. Hopefully the good quarter for everybody as we start to get into the holiday season. Holidays feel like coming fast and furious, whether it's Halloween, Thanksgiving, or Christmas and Hanukkah and New Year's and all the things that happen in Q4, plus the rush of trying to close business for the year. So busy time for everybody, busy time for our industry, and of course, always the possibility of the Thanksgiving surprise that may have come out of some crazy executive announcement. But I hope everybody's doing well. Want to, as if you listen to the show, there's a lot of times when I'm sort of thinking about, trying to put this latest transition from sort of cloud era into the AI era and try and put it in perspective. And again, I'm always trying to figure out, like, is it worthwhile to try and put it into any sort of perspective based on, past history, based on things that we've seen in the past, trends that we've seen, patterns that we've seen, or, is it really completely new? And I think back on it a lot, and I feel like, at least for right now, again, we are, we're going to be coming up on about 3 years into sort of the chat GPT era of this AI era, if you will. And it does feel like we are in a very, very awkward stage. And it feels like we're in an awkward stage in the same way that, if you first have a kid, you are, completely confused. You are just trying to survive day in and day out. Every day is completely different. Everybody's trying to give you advice. Everybody's trying to tell you the best way to do something. And at the same way, it feels like sort of an awkward era in the same way that, you deal with like teenage kids and nothing makes sense. You can't figure out the way that they dress. You can't figure out the terminology they're using. You can't figure out why they like a certain music that just makes your head hurt. And then you think back to, well, we did the same sort of thing. And we had music that made our parents' head hurt and all those sort of things. And so I feel like we are very much in a very awkward stage of if this is really truly a new era with AI, which it feels like it. Everybody seems to agree that we are in some sort of AI era. What the success of that will be is obviously to be determined. But I want to kind of explore why it feels like it's such an awkward stage and where some of the awkwardness, may be okay and perfectly fine. It just needs to play itself out. And some of it still needs to be sort of rationalized in a way that right now we're all just kind of ignoring because we go, well, it's the next big thing. And you can never really know what the next big thing is going to look like, especially in the earliest stages. Really only with sort of hindsight and 2020 vision can you really go, oh, okay, well, that was obvious. So what I want to try and do over the next, so many minutes and then for the rest of the show, I want to kind of dig into that awkward stage, how we might be looking at it right, how we might be looking at it wrong. And, what is leading us to feel like it is such a sort of awkward time in terms of this era transition. So we'll get to that right after the break. We know that AI helps us work faster and more efficiently, but what if it could also help us live longer, healthier lives? We want to introduce you to Interconnected, a fascinating new podcast about the tech behind the tech. This week, they dive into the revolution that AI is bringing to medicine. In episode 2, world-renowned cardiologist Dr. Eric Topol and decentralized pioneer Jim Nasser explain how AI is enhancing disease prevention, supercharging personalized care, and giving patients control of their data. Listen to Interconnected today, wherever you get your podcasts. And we're back. And as I mentioned at the top of the show, I kind of want to dig into, kind of this thing I've been going through in terms of thinking about, where this next era is going, this AI-centric, AI infused era that we're kind of getting into, and kind of the weirdness of, anytime something's new, there's always these big spectrums of, what's possible versus what's reality, what's the timing of what's possible, and with those things being very unknown, but only sort of, infused or supported by a few data points, again, because things are new, there's always a lot of speculation about, okay, well, what could happen? What paths are going to open up that new ideas are going to evolve? How is the dynamics of the marketplace going to evolve? What are people going to support? What are people not going to support? All those sort of what ifs and what's and hows are all floating around a lot, and so it creates a lot of somewhat uncertainty to a certain extent, but it also it creates opportunity, and that's the nature of our business, is that there's always things changing. There's always a certain amount of uncertainty going on. It feels a little bit, and again, the thing I've been trying to do, having lived through a number of these era transitions, whether it was kind of the rise of the internet, kind of the kind of the boom of the internet, which again I'll put from let's say 1994, 95-ish, when it sort of really started kicking off. Kind of went through all that, went through the cloud era where public cloud and SaaS and all those things became sort of ways in which IT evolved, and we're now sort of beginning to get into this IT era, which is both impacting consumer usage patterns, technology patterns, as well as business and enterprise and government usage patterns and so forth. And I keep coming back to trying to think about what are things that I've sort of seen before, what things feel and look familiar, versus kind of continuing to kind of check myself and go, if you only set it in that context, if you only set it in the context of like how things evolved at the beginning of the internet era, it's going to be really hard to sort of make a parallel judgment because, for example, just simple things, when the internet era sort of got started, we really didn't have the ubiquity of, people with access to technology that we do now, right? There are certain parallels that we saw. We saw, things like massive amount of capital flowing into the markets, venture capital and investment capital flowing into the markets. We saw early, sort of market leaders. The NVIDIA Cisco comparison is sort of somewhat apt at this point. But at the same time, we also didn't see, we didn't have certain things in place, i.e., people didn't have broadband internet access. They didn't have internet access in general. I mean, we had things like dial-up and very bad internet. We didn't have sort of on-demand. We didn't have the number of connected users, and so you didn't necessarily have the network effects that we have today. We didn't have the ability to allow free services to necessarily happen because so much of the internet was sort of funded and monetized by things like advertising and other stuff. So as we look at today's AI, there are going to be certain parallels that you go, okay, I've seen those before. Those feel sort of similar, but at the same time, you're constantly kind of telling yourself, well, you can't use exactly those parallels because again, so much of the landscape, so much of the playing field, if you will, is so significantly different. That the dynamics of things don't necessarily work. And so, I sort of was making a list for myself of, what's causing me to have so much, what feels like awkwardness in terms of trying to do these things, right? So, and I sort of started making these lists of things, right? So like in the early years of the internet, we tried to replicate physical based activities, right? So the first thing that we always tend to do in any technology transition is we sort of go, okay, let's take what we do now and let's sort of digitize it or apply technology to it. And we see this, early days of the internet, what did we try to do? We tried to go, okay, I want to build the equivalent of a storefront and I want that storefront to be now on the internet, but I don't really know what that means, but I knew what an old storefront looked like at a store. So I'm going to kind of replicate a lot of those same types of things, right? The early years of the internet wasn't really dependent upon everybody being on board with it. It was sort of okay, here's this new way of doing stuff. Whereas, it does feel like in the AI world, everything feels like it's going, it for the thing to work out in the way that it's sort of projected, everything has to sort of be dependent upon AI. And so, you get those, okay, what was the level of dependency versus, what is the expectation of dependency now, right? You had the early years, like I said, the early years of the internet, we were kind of thinking about replicating standard things. How would things get delivered? What would a storefront look like? How might we transact some sort of commerce? We really weren't thinking really differently. We weren't thinking about like the sharing economy. We weren't thinking about social media. We were just like, hey, what if some information was available to people that, you or whatever that thing. Whereas in the AI era, the beginning of this AI, the people that are leading this, and again, some of this is because of just the massive, massive amounts of funding, but maybe it's because of the core nature of the technology. The leaders are talking about curing cancer and doubling human longevity and just gigantic, enormous things. Whereas, at the beginning of the internet, we were like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if we had 500 channels of television, or whatever, like those sort of like we didn't, the scope was different, right? And I think that's, part of why we were trying to, create some sort of like compass or some sort of rationalization about what does all this AI stuff mean, because it feels different in terms of the scope, potentially in terms of the impact. Cloud, we think about this cloud at the beginning sort of had lift and shift. AI sort of has, well, everybody gets a Gen AI license and you'll go figure out what you can do with it, right? So, there were the early days of like, hey, we're doing it because there was some easy, simple things. But if we think back upon it, the earliest lift and shift, just take an application that you have and put it in a VM in AWS, didn't really have any impact on your business, right? In fact, if you look back on it, it probably cost you more than it would have to run that same application, that web service or something in your data center. Right now we have, hey, everybody gets a Gen AI license. Hey, you get a Copilot or you get a Gemini or you get a, whatever, a Cursor. I think multiple years we're going to look back on that. We're going to go, that sort of activity of just sort of giving people, you're not going to be able to necessarily quantify it, and you're not necessarily going to be able to go like, oh, that was a big deal. That was a big step. Like that almost feels like, it's not a thing. There, obviously on the pro side, again, on the positive side, massive amounts of funding, massive numbers of consumers have some sort of experience of what AI looks like. And again, I go back to the idea of like, in the earliest days of the internet, you didn't, if you go back and look at the numbers of people that were subscribed to like America Online, it was, millions or tens of millions. Now we're talking about hundreds of millions of people within a year or two can get access to some new thing. So there are plenty of people who have some sort of experience in AI. We're already seeing, public policy being driven around how are we going to, retrain workforces? How are we going to teach people this stuff? How are we going to, educate large numbers of people about what's possible? How do we, it's just massive orders of magnitude. And again, a lot of this is just because, the spread and the distribution of technology to people and the ease of access of getting access to it is just infinitely greater. But again, as I get back to sort of this, we're in these awkward years. I feel like in any given day, we sort of live in these various spectrums that we have to figure out, and it could be the spectrum of, the negativity of an Ed Zitron to the crazy big ideas of a Sam Altman. And I don't mean those and as necessarily like, Ed's ideas are wrong. We've talked about them. We're going to highlight them again on Cloud News of the Month this month. But like on one end, he has a very distinct perspective of like where AI is going and the possibilities of it. Somebody like Sam Altman has a very different perspective on that. You could be looking at it from the perspective of, a Dario who runs Anthropic and constantly coming back to saying like half of mankind is going to be unemployed within 5 years because of this. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have somebody like Satya Nadella who is sort of trying to temper it, obviously, because, for one thing, Microsoft sells to end users and they would like the number of users to be high. But any given day, you have, wild speculation from technology leaders going, this is going to be ridiculously disruptive and you should expect to, 1 out of every 2 people is not going to have their job anymore. And on the other end, you've got, people going, well, this is really just an augmentation of what people do. And, maybe that's, the equivalent of getting a 20% off coupon from, Bed Bath and Beyond or something. Like maybe it's not going to be that big a deal, right? So we have to sort of live with those spectrums every day. We have to live with the spectrums of going, what do you do when you have a Jensen Huang who, their company is now worth almost $4 trillion. Wasn't that 2 or 3 years ago, and is now dictating to sort of everybody, you need to have the biggest, baddest hardware with the most forward-looking frontier models at all time to, Larry Ellison, who is now making, at least on paper, a ton of money by simply, having a bare metal cloud and being willing to, be somewhat agnostic and play the right politics and stuff. And so we're dealing with those sort of spectrums every day of like, just the massed sheer capacity and volume and leverage that the largest companies in this game that appear to be somewhat profitable, although many of them aren't profitable, are having to deal with. So we're dealing with this just gigantic spectrum of opinions, and there feels like there is very little sort of living in the middle. There's very little kind of rational discussion somewhere in the vast middle of those huge spectrums. And I think that leads to a little bit of awkwardness, is that on any given day, you might feel like, okay, the AI market is going way in that direction. And the next day you go, oh my gosh, DeepSeek came out, and nobody's going to need NVIDIA chips, and nobody's going to need the largest models. You can do this in small models, and it was a little tiny team that did it for a fraction of what was possible. And again, that's been 4 months, and we've sort of forgotten about what felt like an impact that made, and now we've just sort of moved on from it. And so, I think that the speed at which it's sort of evolving, the breadth of the spectrums at which people are talking about sort of how this is going to play itself out, is leading to a lot of whiplash, but it's leading to a lot of kind of awkward situations in which, when you ask people who are running organizations, that aren't NVIDIA or aren't OpenAI. They are, they're in pharmaceuticals, or they're in transportation, or they're in government, or they're in banking, or they're in, just your everyday manufacturing types of jobs. They're the ones going, I'm looking for some guidance as to where to go with this. I don't really get any numbers that I can necessarily live with, other than sort of fearful numbers. Oh my gosh, I'm worried that if I don't keep up with this, we're going to get lapped in 6 months, is what would have taken 10 years or something like that. So I think the market as a whole is sort of living in that awkwardness, that broad spectrum of wild whiplash sort of changes every couple of weeks. And there are some bigger issues at play here, right? I mean, we've got the vast majority of companies that are doing things in AI right now are unprofitable, right? And so, there's a parallel of that back to the early days of kind of the internet, where it was like, oh, big wild ideas that were, massively funded, that crashed and burned. And so there's speculation and concern about, okay, are we going to have some sort of crash? We do have, just a few companies, again, kind of going back to the analogies of, like, the gold rush in the 1860s, where people that made the most money were the people that did picks and shovels, and companies like Levi's that sold blue jeans to every prospector that was out, digging a mine, or scooping shiny rocks out of the water. You've got a high level of unprofitability, but propped up by a bunch of funding and a bunch of speculation. You've got some companies which are wildly profitable, who are now sort of influencing the market in interesting ways by, sort of buying their own product from them, and then standing up the companies that could have, like, you get into some interesting situations. We have sort of, near monopolies at the hardware level, which, for every industry trend that we've seen, yes, we've seen an Apple, but we haven't seen the corresponding Android yet sort of come along for that. And we had a whole show talking about that. So, you've got that on one end. And then on the other end, you've got reports coming out, somewhat frequently now, questioning, are enterprises seeing an ROI for this, right? And the simplest way of looking at this, and I've had numerous conversations with different senior executives or C-level executives at various places. And again, I'm not giving anything away here. This is conversations that we see, and we see public disclosure of this is, hey, we bought 50,000 seats of, X, Gemini, Copilot, whatever it is, something for our developers. And, they're into the first year of renewal of that software license, and they're going, I couldn't tell you what the ROI of that is. I couldn't give you a metric that justifies why we spent $100 million on that, right? They are coming back to me asking for more money. They've now embedded it into whatever bundle that we have, and we're struggling to figure out why we need that justification. What is that? Or they go, well, our developers are 10 or 20% more productive. They're not any happier. They don't necessarily trust the code that was written. But we also feel like we can't turn it off because, we don't want to get behind this, right? So, there's a lot of, hey, we're doing AI stuff, but we haven't figured out the killer use case. We haven't figured out the financial justification for it. We're trying to figure out the ROI of it. We haven't figured out how to, easily customize it for our business. So there's a lot of that sort of going on. There is, a number of anecdotal, I don't know if we've kind of can draw direct correlation to it yet, but we've seen a number of layoffs in our industry. We've seen a lot of people who are struggling to find new jobs, whether those are, junior level, first level types of people. But there's a lot of, job movement or jobless creation because of the speculation of AI. Whether it's, we now can actually do something and replace those people, or it's, hey, we should probably get ahead of this and assume that AI will be able to do a bunch of things. And so there's a lot of uncertainty just from a job market perspective as well. So it's an interesting time. And again, what's sort of interesting is this quickness at which we feel the need. And again, this is normal in our industry. The normal thing in our industry is every 5 to 10 years, whatever the new thing that comes along, well, that's going to kill the previous thing, right? X is going to kill this. There will no longer be any more of whatever. And, one of the mantras that we've seen in this show is that almost nothing ever dies. Yes, there are certain companies that go away because of bad management or, yes, you could point to like BlackBerry and say, hey, BlackBerry died because of the iPhone or something along those lines. And there's some of that, obviously. But, for the most part, like things, yes, one thing sort of becomes more prevalent than another thing, but it rarely dies. It's amazing, even in the last 2 or 3 years, the number of things that we talk about, that are, oh, well, that's no longer viable, right? So maybe it was a retrieval augmented generation, and now it's, RAG is a dead paradigm. And it's like, no, that people are still using a lot of that. To the point where, we're now like, oh, okay, prompt engineering, that doesn't matter anymore. We're now to the point where everything is AI agents, rub some AI agents on it. AI agents will do this and AI, and it, I would not be surprised if we're sitting here at this time next year in 2026 and people are like, oh yeah, agents are no longer a thing. We're no longer, we're way past agents. And you sort of want to point to some of this and you want to go, again, where is the rationale? Where is the pragmatism within an organization, standard kind of company that's not just, your sort of chatbots, customer support agents, therapy for consumers, developer assistance, writing some marketing content. Like, where is the thing? And again, I go back to like the show I talked about last week. We could be going back. We could be not hearing about a lot of those things because they don't exist yet. Because again, we've only been doing this for less than 3 years, and a lot of this is very new, and the standards aren't necessarily in place, and the people with the skill set haven't figured stuff out because it takes 5 years or so to start to become and have expertise in stuff. So we just haven't gotten there yet, right? The job that needs 10 years of Gen AI prompt engineering, probably not find a lot of those people. But at the same time, we feel this need, at least from a press perspective and maybe from a technology perspective. We got bored at the old thing. The old thing didn't become the killer application yet. And so we move on to the next thing. So I throw all this out not to be negative, not to be overly positive, but to just sort of come back to the idea of we are in very awkward times from an AI perspective. And again, I'll go back to what I said at the top of the show. It's awkward in the sense of, like if you have a kid and that first year, the full first year is every day is different. I don't really know what I'm doing. Somebody else is giving me some sort of suggestion on what to do. Somebody telling me I'm doing it right. Somebody's telling me I'm doing it wrong. The thing I thought I figured out yesterday doesn't work today. And the thing I figured out today came from completely out of nowhere. And so there's a lot of that from an awkwardness perspective, and you're not sure what any given day is going to look like. And it also feels awkward to, sit here and have people tell us that, the company that, is leading the industry from, say, like an OpenAI perspective and is taking on more capital than we've ever seen ever before and is burning through it faster than we've ever seen before and is working on new partnerships that they, at this point, couldn't pay for, that's completely rational. And it's the same way of, us, hearing the thing that a teenage kid is telling you, 6, 7 and skibbity riz and, whatever the heck, is it, and you're just going like, that doesn't make any sense. I don't understand that. None of that, but you're never really sure if you're like, oh, but that's going to be a thing that takes off and that becomes the new thing. Or if you're just like, oh, no, that is 1 + 1 = 7, upside down kind of thinking. Right. So we're in an awkward time. And every time at the beginning of any of these things, we are in an awkward time, right? We were in an awkward time when Steve Ballmer said he couldn't figure out why Apple was trying to sell a phone for $500. And we were all perfectly happy to have a device in our pocket that every time it fell on the ground, it broke the screen. And we were like, oh, that's fine. I'm just happy to have this mobile device in my pocket. And we were perfectly fine to have it have horrible internet for the first couple of years of 3G and less than 3G. And we sort of rationalized our way through that because it was new and we were trying to figure it out. And we're kind of in that right now. We'll figure out if AI gets out of its awkward years, its awkward transition, if the economics start to work out, if we start to see widespread adoption in ways that aren't just the few basic use cases. We'll see if that all happens. I would expect we probably will. Will it be more Ed than Sam? I don't know. Will it be more Dario than Satya? I don't know. Will it be more Jensen than Larry? I don't know. Or whatever spectrum that you're trying to figure out how to rationalize this all in. But we are most definitely in some very unusual and awkward years. That's not unusual from the perspective of a new era, but when you're living in it, it can sometimes feel like, what? But wait, it's sort of like the weather in the Northeast. Wait 15 minutes, and if you don't like it, it'll change. And that's sort of where we are with AI right now. So if sometimes it feels sort of weird and awkward, I think that's sort of where we're supposed to be. And we will see as an industry, as any even individual, how it sort of goes forward from here. So with that, I'll wrap it up. We will talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.